Through history, power dynamics are usually stable. The powerful stay in charge and the powerless remain subjugated. But sometimes all the conditions are met for exceptional events to occur. This is the story of a man who rose from an illiterate orphan peasant to the Emperor of China, Zhu Yuanzhang, the founder of the Ming Dynasty. 14th century China. For decades, the heirs of Genghis Khan have ruled over the nation with an iron fist. Despite its early prosperity, the Mongol Yuan dynasty they installed has gradually declined due to political infighting and a series of natural disasters. As a consequence, poverty has soared and famine has risen. Starting in the mid-1330s, new harsh ethnic discrimination policies have been promulgated against the Han Chinese, adding to their suffering. The famished and destitute population is ready to take up arms and reclaim from their Mongol overlords a Han Chinese empire. The legacy of the man who would rise from the very bottom of society to one day sit on the dragon throne began on the 21st of October 1328. As the nation was plunged in a devastating civil war of succession, the common people suffered. Along the Huai River, in the small village of Zhongli, a boy named Zhu Chongba was born to destitute peasants Zhu Shizhen and his wife, known as Mrs. Chen. He was their fourth son. In recent times, the Zhu family household had relocated repeatedly throughout the region to escape poverty and debt, and was now struggling to make a living in Zhongli. Thus, education was out of the question, and it seemed as if young Zhu Chongba was destined to live and die as an illiterate peasant. Growing up, he saw most of his siblings married off into other households, as his parents could not support them all. Indeed, the region was frequently struck by natural disasters such as devastating droughts, floods, and locust invasions, leading to food shortages and occasional famines. Relief efforts organized by the Yuan dynasty proved insufficient, triggering occasional uprisings by famished commoners or even at times local officials. Both were additionally outraged by the strong ethnic discrimination and immense inflation of the late Yuan dynasty. For now, they were subdued, but resentment and unrest remained in the background. In the Huai River Valley, one unusual agitator would eventually tip the scale. A former Buddhist monk named Pang Yingyu arrived in 1338, preaching the doctrine of the illegal White Lotus sect. This religious movement, inspired by Buddhism and Manichaeism, prophesied that in the face of these injustices and growing chaos, the reincarnation of the Buddha was to arrive at any hour to guide the righteous to harmony. In this, Pang Yingyu was not at his first attempt. He had already inspired an unsuccessful rebellion a few months prior, after which he escaped and found refuge in the Huai River Valley. For the next few years, he would keep preaching his prophecy of apocalypse and revolution to the local people. Events would give them a reason to revolt. Around May or June 1344, raging storms and torrential rain erupted, engorging the mighty Yellow River, which could no longer be contained. The unleashed Huanghe broke its dikes and flooded the whole region, causing widespread death and destruction. Additionally, severe drought occurred in regions no longer irrigated due to the shift in the course. As a final nail in the coffin, the crumbling Yuan dynasty could not even afford to repair the infrastructure, leaving the population to its demise. The family of 15-year-old Zhu Chongba would be shattered from this one-too-many disaster. In subsequent epidemic and famine, his father, mother, and eldest brother were all wiped out. With virtually nothing to their name, Zhu and the surviving brother could not even afford to bury their relatives properly. As he was evidently too young and vulnerable to fend for himself, the teenager was entrusted to a local Buddhist monastery as a novice, soon learning the basic practices and way of life of a monk. the life of the future emperor of China had suddenly taken a very different path. Zhu Chongba would however not settle down in the temple for long. Given the generally disastrous situation, the teenager and the other novices were sent out to beg for their food as mendicant monks a couple of months after arriving. Thus, as from 1345, Zhu began roaming the Huai River Valley as such. Despite the hardships, he had a chance to discover the outside world and became very autonomous. Zhu's adventure would end around 1347 or 1348 when he returned to the Buddhist monastery after the situation likely improved. He was seemingly prepared to live the rest of his life in the study of wisdom, acquiring basic literacy and studying Buddhism. Fate, however, had much larger ambitions for him. By 1351, the Yuan authorities, under the competent new Chancellor Dokdo, were finally ready to subdue the Yellow River, which still ran wild. Although this project was undertaken to appease and help the local population, the means used would have the exact opposite effect. For the grand endeavour, 150,000 local civilians were mobilized. The workers would be digging and building from May to December in extremely harsh conditions and with barely any pay. For an outraged and hungry population, agitated by fanatical sect leaders, this was the breaking point. Donning a red turban on his forehead, one Lotus sect disciple named Han Shantong organized a great uprising in Yingzhou. Massing hundreds, he had the firm intent of overthrowing the local government. The Yuan dynasty was fragile, but still far from on its knees. Reacting promptly, local authorities quickly identified, apprehended and executed Han Shantong, judging another ordinary riot had been put down. However, his legacy would survive. The Red Turban Rebellion had begun. Across the region, outraged youths flocked to the heir of the revolution, the teenage son of Han Shantong named Han Linar, and his guardian, the soon-to-be general Liu Futong. Adopting the red turban, the rebels swarmed villages, even capturing small towns and a few cities in an unbreakable momentum. Before long, the revolution would come to Zhu. In 1352, a red turban commander named Guo Zixing marched his forces into the region, leading his men to capture Haozhou, the largest city in the rural area, on the 16th of February. Amidst these chaotic times, Zhu's temple was plundered by either roaming bandits, red turban rebels or rogue soldiers of the Yuan forces. In any case, the young man found himself once more without a home or purpose. With little to no prospects, Zhu eventually decided to join in the Red Turban Rebellion himself. On the 15th of April 1352, at the age of 23, the ex-monk presented himself at the gates of Haozhou, eager to join Guo Zixing's ranks. He then officially marked a new chapter in his life, adopting the name of Zhu Yuanzhang, a name which would mark the course of history. His ascension could begin. Zhu Yuanzhang turned out to be a good soldier and a natural leader. Since he also had notions in literacy, the young rebel was rapidly selected to become an officer in the growing Red Turban army. But evidently, Guo Zixing saw in him more than a simple subordinate. The commander would take him into his own family, marrying him to an adoptive daughter of his named Ma. Now, Zhu Yuanzhang was someone. Despite its formidable start, the Red Turban Rebellion's initial momentum would be cut down, as the Yuan authorities had now reorganized and were ready to strike back. Led by the talented Chancellor Dokdo, the Yuan began a severe crackdown on the revolt. They would retake Xuzhou, a major rebel city, and clamp down the rebels everywhere. By winter, the city of Haozhou would find itself encircled by the Yuan armies, locally commanded by Jia Lu, the official who had overseen the repairs of the Yellow River dikes. Within the walls, local rebel leaders, under major pressure, felt a factionalism and internal strife. It seemed like the rebellion was at an end. But fate had other plans for Zhu Yuanzhang, whose story would not stop there. On the 17th of June 1353, as Haozhou was on the brink of surrender, Commander Jia Lu died, leading to a retreat of the Yuan forces. This was the long-awaited opportunity for Zhu Yuanzhang to escape the quarreling of his superiors. The young officer returned to his home village to raise troops of his own. His newfound fame and prestige attracted reportedly 700 men. Among them were some of his soon-to-be best and most loyal generals, such as one Xu Da, who was to one day capture the Yuan capital itself. But for now, Zhu Yuanzhang and his men were far from independence. Evidently a great asset for the cause, Red Turban commanders promoted him to higher and higher positions, as Zhu conquered several towns and districts north of the Yangtze River, such as Chuzhou, in the months that followed. These conquests allowed him to incorporate a staggering amount of soldiers into his force, now commanding about 30,000 troops. However, military men were not the only ones to join him. In these chaotic times, idle scholars and other literate men also sought out people to serve, often being recruited by emerging warlords. In 1354, one such scholar named Li Shanchang, neither destitute nor well off, entered service under Zhu Yuanzhang. As the young officer's constantly expanding forces and territories were now too large to manage personally, Li Shanchang would become his main administrator and play a decisive role in army logistics. More importantly, Li would teach him history and philosophy, encouraging his employer to adhere to Confucian values. For example, he would advise him based on historical events, such as the actions of Liu Bang, the founder of the Han dynasty, who, like Zhu, came from a peasant family. Putting an emphasis on the Confucian doctrine of benevolence, Li encouraged the future emperor of China to protect the people and show mercy towards a defeated enemy. His teachings greatly encouraged the developing ambitions of the once illiterate orphan peasant, evidently contributing to his legendary path. Strengthened by his new educated advisors, Zhu's conquests continued. In early 1355, he victoriously entered Hezhou, reaching the Yangtze. But the Red Turban's operations would be shaken by an unforeseen incident. In March, local commander Guo Zixing succumbed to illness. The death of his mentor could have been the opportunity for Zhu Yuanzhang to inherit his position and become a formal superior commander, but his growing ambition suffered a setback. In Bozhou, seat of the northern branch of the Red Turbans, another event reshaped the rebellion itself. Han Linar, the teenage figurehead of the movement, officially ascended the throne on the 16th of March. At the age of about 16, he received the name of Xiao Mingwang, Small King of Brightness, in reference to the White Lotus sect's beliefs, and became the nominal emperor of a revived Song dynasty. This regime was, however, not the one which would reunite China. Now on the throne, the symbolic teenage monarch designated late Guo Zixing's eldest surviving son, Guo Tianxu, to succeed as commander, as Zhu Yuanzhang was merely appointed as his second in command. In spite of this, Zhu could count on his strong personal prestige to attract talented scholars, soldiers and officers. During this period would flock to him Chang Yuchun, who would be Zhu's greatest general alongside Xu Da. But more importantly for the short run, River Fleet commanders Liao Yong'an, his younger brother and soon-to-be successor Liao Yongzhong, and Yu Tonghai also joined Zhu. Their ships would become crucial for the Red Turban's next ambitions, Nanjing, known at the time as Jiqing, a jewel on the other side of the Yangtze River. It was time to expand south. On the 10th of July 1355, the army crossed the Yangtze using the newly acquired fleet. Although they were unable to capture Jiqing in this initial attack, its surroundings were rapidly secured, forming a local base. Another unsuccessful attack in October would serve the interests of the ambitious Zhu Yuanzhang, as his last superior, late Guo Zixing's son, Guo Tianxu, perished in battle. Thus, he was now the official commander-in-chief of the whole force. Within the space of 3 years, the young man had risen from a begging Buddhist monk to a full-scale warlord. Adding to his delight, his wife Ma bore his first son, Zhu Biao, on the 10th of October, the future crown prince of the Ming dynasty. Zhu's legacy was launched. After some careful preparation and reorganization, Zhu Yuanzhang, now in full control of the army, was ready for another attempt at Jiqing. On the 10th of April 1356, the city finally opened its gates to the triumphant general, who promptly made it his personal capital and baptized it Yingtian, responding to heaven. The future Nanjing would one day host the imperial throne. In addition to its strategic resources, the city also hosted many talented scholars who would be recruited to form a small government in all but name, slowly paving the road for the future Ming dynasty. However, Zhu's rapid rise in fame also attracted the ire of some. A conspiration within the Red Turban forces to assassinate him was uncovered, orchestrated by none other than his second-in-command, Guo Tianjue, the last remaining son of his late mentor, Guo Zixing. The subordinate likely felt wronged by this man who stood in what he believed to be his rightful position. In any case, the conspirators' prompt execution confirmed the supremacy of Zhu Yuanzhang on this front of the Song dynasty. However, the warlord would cunningly follow the advice of his scholars, who told him not to claim independence yet, but rather consolidate his forces. Famously, scholar Zhu Sheng would soon counsel him thusly: Gao zhu qiang, guang ji liang, huan chang wang. Build high walls, accumulate abundant provisions, and ascend the throne slowly. Thus, Zhu Yuanzhang remained loyal to the Red Turbans and the figurehead emperor Han Linar. In this, Zhu Yuanzhang was a minority. Most other rebel leaders, emboldened and boastful, were quick to officially establish their own kingdoms and dynasties. His very neighbors had done so. To his east, Zhang Shicheng, a salt smuggler turned bandit king, founded the state of Dazhou. Zhang had nearly been crushed by the competent Yuan Chancellor Toktok during the latter's crackdown on the rebellions. But amidst court intrigue, Yuan Emperor Togon Tomor banished the official, which gave Zhang the opportunity to break the siege and recover. The kingdom of Dazhou would become the richest and most powerful of the rebel factions. The clash was inevitable. As Zhu Yuanzhang continuously expanded east, his capture of Changzhou by the summer of 1357 prompted Zhang Shicheng to attack. Following a series of small victories, Zhu's talented admiral Liao Yong'an ventured deep into enemy territory. Outstretching too much, he was captured on the waters of Lake Tai. Although he would endure 8 years of captivity until his death, the admiral would never betray Zhu and agree to switch sides, earning the young warlord's deepest respect. In the meantime, his rank would be inherited by his younger brother, Liao Yongzhong, as Zhu held firm. In a brilliant maneuver, his forces captured the bandit king's main general and brother, Zhang Shida, in turn, an inestimable prize. The commander, however, preferred to take his own life rather than to serve as a hostage, and purposefully starved himself to death. Fighting between the two rebels would soon quiet down. Zhang Shicheng accepted nominal surrender to the desperate Yuan dynasty in August, in exchange for titles and privileges. Zhu Yuanzhang, not yet strong enough to challenge his neighbor fully, would turn his focus elsewhere. To the south, Another rebel faction emerged around Pirate King Fang Guozhen, who ruled from the coast and had crucial control over maritime transportation of grain to the capital. For now, he also nominally surrendered to the Yuan dynasty with a dubious allegiance, but would one day have to be taken care of. Could the Red Turban movement as a whole converge its forces to defeat both rival rebels and the Yuan dynasty? Well, from the onset of the rebellion, the Red Turbans had actually split into a northern and southern branch, two opposite factions which would soon clash. The northern branch, to which Zhu Yuanzhang belonged, was the so-called Song dynasty, nominally led by Han Linar. Protected by his general Liu Futong, they would achieve great conquests in the north to the expense of the Yuan. Marking a great symbolic victory, Liu Futong was able to capture the city of Bianyang, today's Kaifeng, on the 11th of June 1358 and make it the dynasty's new capital. This city had indeed been the capital of the previous Song dynasty, the last Han Chinese dynasty before the Mongol invasion, from which they claimed succession. Their momentum would however soon be cut down by a new figure of the collapsing Yuan, an autonomous Mongol commander named Tsagan Tamar, having raised troops of his own to face the rebels, began a great reconquest of the North China plain. He would retake Bianyang by the 10th of September 1359, compelling Han Linar and Liu Futong to rebase to the small city of Anfeng. The Red Turban's southern branch had embraced a different path. After the failure of Han Shantong's uprising, his old mentor, Pang Yingyu, still preaching revolution, found another disciple in one Xu Shaohui. Originally a cloth vendor, Xu embraced the Red Turban as well and began his own autonomous rebellion. Leading the southern Red Turbans, the rebel declared himself emperor, founding the state of Tianwan, which by the end of the decade had massively expanded. But much like Han Linar in the north, Xu Shaohui of Tianwan was only a figurehead emperor. His lack of true authority would lead to his untimely end in 1360, when he was assassinated by his greatest general, Chen Youliang, soon to be Zhu Yuanzhang's great rival. Having eliminated the figurehead, Chen then overthrew the state of Tianwan entirely. The general founded in its place his own great Han dynasty, known as Chen Han, proclaiming himself emperor. All southern Red Turban commanders would submit, except for one breakaway general named Ming Yuzhen, who would play an important role later on. Thus, by the late 1350s, a multitude of competing rebel factions quarreled within the crumbling Yuan dynasty. So where could the future emperor of China expand his domains? The north was secured by friendly Song generals. The east was controlled by Zhang Shichang, who was for now in a clear position of superiority. The west, upstream the Yangtze, was held by Chen Youliang, also too powerful to be tackled for the moment. Thus, Zhu would march south to conquer regions still controlled by isolated Yuan forces. If he wanted to become a respected leader, Zhu could not behave as any other bandit king or ruthless warlord. Advised by his Confucian scholars, the future emperor of China imposed strict discipline on his generals. He vowed not to be yet another pillaging commander, but a defender of the people. No atrocities would be committed, no looting would take place. Enemies would be respected, and the people protected. In this aim, Zhu ordered the prompt execution of brutal commanders, however talented, found guilty of plundering and slaughtering. Strengthened by this respectable policy, Zhu would relatively easily conquer territory from the crumbling Yuan dynasty, encountering small resistance. A first wave of invasion in 1357 saw the conquests of Ningguo on the 12th of May, Huizhou in August, and Chizhou by the 13th of November. Another expedition was assembled in 1358, going further south. Jinhua would fall in January 1359, and the campaign ended by December with the capture of Quzhou. Zhu's expansion, however, attracted the ire of his western neighbour, Chen Youliang, who now officially led the Southern Red Turbans. Initially inspired by the same man, both rebel factions would enter war, and their clash would culminate in the largest freshwater naval battle in world history. Chen Youliang, emperor of the Chen Han dynasty, evidently saw Zhu Yuanzhang's rise as a threat to be eliminated. Having amassed a formidable river fleet, Chen sailed down the Yangtze in June 1360 to strike at his rival's heart, the city of Yingtian. On his way, he planned to take the riverside citadels. Xu Da and Chang Yuchun withstood an attack at Chizhou, leading an unfazed Chen Youliang to besiege Taiping instead. Guarded by their tall walls, Yangtze River fortresses were difficult targets. After 3 days of unsuccessful attack, the Han forces devised a new strategy, using their huge ship's mast to go over the walls of the city and crush the small garrisons within. Using this method, Chen Youliang began steamrolling down the river. Zhu Yuanzhang was in trouble. His naval force was 10 times smaller than his enemies, and more worryingly, Chen's fleet was now sailing directly to Yingtian. To protect his capital, Zhu and his advisors promptly drafted a cunning battle plan. Fortifications were hastily raised as double agents spread misinformation to guide Chen's forces into traps, and ambush parties were hidden in the surroundings of the anticipated landing grounds. By the 23rd of June, the Han ships were sighted on the horizon. As the forces inevitably clashed, Zhu's meticulous strategy gradually unfolded perfectly. By dusk, Chen Youliang's force was utterly defeated, losing 100 large ships, 20,000 dead, and 7,000 captured. Not only was Zhu's domain saved, but the future emperor of China had now gained mastery over the river. A protracted war ensued both on the Yangtze front and on land, in which Zhu's troops gained much ground. The Han Emperor reconquered territory as far as Anqing, although he was unable to retake inland areas from Zhu's generals. By now, Zhu Yuanzhang had grown weary of his cumbersome neighbour. Mounting a counterattack, the ambitious warlord assembled a new naval force for a grand expedition to beat Chen Youliang once and for all, pulling together most of his might. The tens of thousands strong army set sail from Yingtian on the 10th of September 1361. Bypassing the fortified river citadels, Zhu Yuanzhang sailed to meet his enemy head-on. Finally, both fleets clashed at Hukou on the 23rd of September. Chen Youliang was defeated and fled to Wuchang, pursued by Xu Da, who would blockade him there. Rather than a costly campaign of conquest, Zhu opted to wait the war out, as Han cities gradually offered to surrender to the threatening force. Amidst these conquests, Song Emperor Han Linar bestowed upon Zhu Yuanzhang the prestigious title of Duke of Wu. But the precious city of Nanchang was taking its time to defect. Soon, troubling news would reach the vanguard of the invading force. Back in the east, Zhang Shicheng seized the brilliant opportunity to attack his undefended neighbor. Keeping his composure, Zhu decided to stay, entrusting Chang Yuchun with the defense of the homeland. The commander's talent was evident, as he brilliantly repelled Zhang Shicheng's forces, breaking his invasion. Adding to his superior's relief, Nanchang finally opened its gates by the 10th of February 1362, allowing Zhu Yuanzhang to triumphantly return to his capital the next month. The path to supremacy was filled with perilous obstacles. Another setback emerged when Zhu faced a new assassination plot against him. For unclear reasons, the Miao ethnic minority garrison in Jinhua and Chuzhou rebelled in March 1362, assassinating his steam general Hu Dahai in the process, and defecting to Zhang Shicheng. This treason demanded an immediate response. Zhou Yuanzhang appointed his nephew Li Wenzhong, who had recently completed studies under esteemed scholars, emerging as Zhu's only educated relative, and Shao Rong, one of his earliest companions, to march south and crush the rebels. The region was successfully pacified, but true danger would come from within. Shao Rong, unsatisfied with Zhu's apparent lack of recognition, grew resentful against his commander. As his frustration deepened, he eventually plotted to assassinate him in early August upon the victorious return of the expedition to Yingtian. The plot was however uncovered barely in time. Shao Rong and the other conspirators were promptly executed, and once again, Zhu had cheated death. As the warlord prepared for a decisive campaign to finish off Chen Youliang, Zhang Shicheng moved his focus to the north, invading the vulnerable Song territories. Undefeated in his momentum, the bandit king's forces eventually stormed Anfang on the 16th of February 1363, seat of Hanlinar, the nominal emperor of the so-called Song dynasty. In the chaos of the battle, the figurehead emperor was captured as his main general and protector Liu Futong died in battle. Since he had always claimed allegiance to the Song regime, and as many of his forces requested a response, Zhu Yuanzhang could not ignore the aggression. In March, a rescue expedition was launched to retake Anfang and free Hanlinar. Zhu's forces saw triumph once more, as the 24-year-old nominal emperor was liberated and relocated to nearby Chuzhou for safety, or perhaps to exert better control on him. In the meantime, Zhang Shicheng halted his expedition on former Song territory, returning to his capital and proclaiming himself King of Wu, probably to provoke Zhu, who held the title of Duke of Wu. But before the latter could tackle him directly, it was time to win the war with Chen Youliang once and for all. Back in Wuchang, Chen Youliang was equally ready for an ultimate campaign, amassing a formidable force of around 300,000 men. The immense fleet sailed south through Lake Poyang and initiated a bitter and lengthy siege at Nanchang on the 5th of June 1363, in which the defenders would heroically hold strong. Meanwhile, Zhu Yuanzhang's own 100,000-man strong fleet left Yingtian with resolve, sailing upstream until it reached Hukou, the mouth of Lake Poyang, on the 24th of August. Over the next 4 days, Zhu would raise fortifications at Nanhuzui and Jingjiangkou, effectively securing the entrance to the lake, before sailing down on the 28th. That same day, Chen Youliang lifted the siege at Nanchang, entering Lake Poyang in turn to confront his enemy. Both sides had amassed all their might and were now face to face. The following day, the largest freshwater naval battle in history would unfold. Zhu's forces numbered only a third of his opponents, but his ships were equipped with fully modernized weaponry, including bombs to be hurled using naval trebuchets, hand cannons, and an array of other pyrotechnic weapons. In addition, bows and crossbows could rain down fire arrows on the enemy fleet. Deploying his naval force in 11 squadrons, Zhu, Xu Da, and Chang Yuchun commanded the heaviest ships in the center. The wings, formed by lighter ships, would be led by his admirals Liao Yongzhong and Yu Tonghai. During the first day, Yu Tonghai's swift vessels were able to set many Han ships ablaze, but the powerful Han heavy crafts greatly damaged Zhu's main ships, forcing him to retract his fleet into a more defensible position. The situation looked bad for the future emperor of China, as Chen Youliang was at a definite advantage. In the night, Xu Da was ordered back to retreat to Yingtian with the most damaged ships. As the second day broke, Zhu took drastic action by executing reluctant officers, ordering another attack on the Han fleet. Once more, his forces were repelled, suffering more losses. Reassessing the situation, the Grand Commander and his staff convened to adopt a new strategy. Since the great Han ships were tightly packed together, the council opted for one of the oldest strategies in the art of war: attack by fire. A small fleet of fire ships was quickly assembled and dispatched towards the bulk of Chen's fleet. The results were immediate. Zhu's enemy suffered devastating losses. Many Han officers and even 2 of Chen's brothers fell. As night descended on Lake Poyang, both sides disengaged for repairs. The following day was marked by small skirmishes and indecisiveness on both sides. Despite the fiery damage of the previous day, the Han fleet was still significantly more powerful than Zhu Yuanzhang's, who would evidently lose a battle of attrition. As the situation seemed bleak, fate intervened once more in favor of the future emperor of China. Land reinforcements under General Hu Daiji had finally arrived from the east to garrison Nanchang. As the city was now strongly protected, Zhu could adapt his strategy. During the night, the warlord pulled his fleet out of the lake, stationing in Hukou. He was now free to set up a great blockade and assemble a whole fleet of fireships, knowing that Chen eventually had to leave Poyang. For a month, the battle froze as both sides remained in their positions, but eventually the Han Emperor began his return to Wuchang, leaving the lake on the 3rd or 4th of October. This would be a fatal mistake. His ships sailed directly into Zhu's incendiary trap. As the Han vessels reached Hukou, the fleet of fireships rushed towards them, unleashing a hell of panic and destruction on Chen's fleet, which completely scattered, becoming easy prey for Zhu's forces. In the debacle, Chen Yaoliang himself was compelled to switch flagships via a small boat, during which he was struck in the head by a stray arrow. The Han Emperor was dead. Thus, his forces' morale collapsed. The following day, most surviving sailors and officers would surrender, only a few escaping back to Wuchang. The Battle of Lake Poyang was over. Although small remnants persisted, the Han dynasty was now essentially defeated. Its formal end would come in February 1364, after a lengthy siege of Wuchang. In a symbolic gesture, Chen Yaoliang's 12-year-old son and successor, Chen Li, abdicated and personally surrendered to the victorious Zhu. In typical Confucian benevolence, not only did the triumphant commander spare him, but he gave Chen Li the title of Marquis of Guida and invited him to stay in a lavish residence in Yingtian. Over the next few months, the last Han territories were gradually incorporated into Zhu Yuanzhang's domain with very little resistance. Thus, after a bitter 4-year struggle, the war had been won. Empowered by the subjugation of his western foe, Zhu Yuanzhang assumed the title of King of Wu in turn, challenging Zhang Shicheng, who had adopted the same title a year prior, another step on the path of imperial claim. (1365). 13 years after joining the Red Turban Rebellion, Zhu Yuanzhang, now King of Wu, had slowly risen from a simple soldier to its champion. He now personally controlled a great chunk of southern China, spanning over 1,000 kilometers. With the absorption of the Han territories, Zhu's domain now directly contacted another faction of the last years of the Yuan dynasty. Beyond his western border stood the territory of Mingyuzhen. This one-eyed warlord, once a general of the southern Red Turbans, had refused to recognize Chen Yaoliang's usurpation of the movement and broke away seeking autonomy. 2 years later, the ambitious man established his own state, the Great Xia dynasty, known as Mingxia, subsequently ascending the throne as its emperor. Mingyuzhen, however, posed no real threat to Zhu Yuanzhang, having no ambitions of expanding towards him. The real danger came from the east. the mighty Zhang Shichang. Recently, Zhang's generals had launched several attacks on Zhu's domains, and it was now time to respond. In a decisive operation, Zhu sent his generals to break a siege at Xinchang in March 1365. But if Zhang were to be completely defeated, a long-term strategy and an elaborate campaign would be needed. How could Zhu achieve total conquest? After lengthy deliberation with his advisors, the strategy of clipping the wings before striking at the heart was agreed upon, essentially severing and capturing the north and south branches of Zhang's territory before smiting his capital of Suzhou. Xu Da was tasked with conquering the north, and the general marched his forces to Taizhou, which was successfully taken in December. After securing its surroundings, the army could then use the Grand Canal to its advantage. Sailing up the waterway, Xu Da and his force stormed Gaoyou, which was captured by the 24th of April of the following year. Zhu's war machine was unstoppable. By the time summer came, all of Zhang's territory north of the Yangtze had fallen. However, his demise came to a standstill, as with summer's onset, the campaign was paused. Indeed, feeding several 100,000 fighting men was no small task. To maintain his army without burdening the civilians, Zhu Yuanzhang embraced the traditional system of military farms called zhuntun. Widely employed in the history of China, the practice of mobilizing troops to produce their own food supplies was brought to an industrial scale by Zhu Yuanzhang. In fact, not only did his zhuntun farms prevent additional taxation and requisition on the people, but they eventually became an additional source of prosperity and surplus. These annual halts in military campaigns were periods of weakness for the warlord and his forces, but neither the Yuan dynasty nor Zhang Shichang saw in them the opportunity to counterattack. And so, as harvest came to an end, Zhu's armies were back on the march. His main force of 200,000 men under Xu Da and Chang Yuchun soon battered at the walls of Huzhou, as Li Wenzhong besieged Hangzhou, which both fell in early December 1366. Thus, Zhang Shichang's wings had been clipped, and it was now time to converge all forces to strike at the heart. By the end of the month, they had arrived at Suzhou. Fully prepared, and with its commanders making a last stand, the city would hold firm for months, despite heavy bombardment of Zhu's cannons. In the meantime, for unknown reasons, Zhu Yuanzhang summoned the nominal 27-year-old Emperor Han Linar, still in Chuzhou, to Yingtian in January 1367. However, in suspicious circumstances, the ship carrying him across the Yangtze sunk, claiming the life of the Red Turban Emperor in the process. Now, Zhu Yuanzhang answered to no one, not even in name. He was a single year away from ascending the throne. With this imperial ambition, scholar officials, including talented bureaucrats, masters of ceremonies, and architects, started working tirelessly as Yingtian would gradually be transformed from the seat of a warlord into a full-scale imperial capital. With the advice of astrologers, the Grand Imperial City and the Forbidden City were laid out to the east of the Old City, and slowly erected by thousands of masons, carpenters, stone carvers, and engineers. Soon, elaborate palaces for the affairs of the state and the imperial household, along with altars to heaven and earth, and an imperial ancestral shrine worshipping Zhu Yuanzhang's forefathers were built. But the soon-to-be Emperor of China did not forget the immense power of intellectual prowess. A Hanlin Academy was also founded to host the elite of the literati, allowing the most talented scholars to advise the imperial court, produce literary works, and compile records. Military matters, however, shifted the focus of Zhu Yuanzhang. On the 1st of October 1367, Suzhou finally fell to Zhu's forces. Amidst the chaos of the breached city, Zhang Shichang was barely intercepted while attempting to hang himself, and taken captive to Yingtian. While Zhu expected him to formally surrender and recognize his superiority, Zhang Shichang staunchly refused the offer, holding strong until the end. Eventually, he died in captivity, either succeeded in killing himself or being assassinated. Following Zhang Shichang's defeat, his territory was incorporated into Zhu's realm. Despite having acquired immense territory, the soon-to-be emperor had no intention of stopping until all the Yuan Empire was his. From the beginning of autumn 1367, a great northern expedition was prepared on the Xuda and Changyuchun. In parallel, a huge southern expedition was launched, with a colossal land force under General Hu Mei, as well as a swift seafaring fleet to sail down the coast under General Tang He. Pirate King Fang Guozhen promptly surrendered by December, leaving only one small rebel kingdom and the Yuan dynasty itself as Zhu's opponents. At the turn of the year, while Hu Mei captured Shaowu, the northern expedition, invading the Yuan's core territory, reached and captured Jinan. Amidst his unstoppable conquest, the orphaned peasant turned supreme warlord with no superiors marked history forever. It was time to claim what he had built up to for 15 years, the mandate of heaven. January 1368, Yingtian. Great crowds had gathered for a historical moment. Zhu, assisted by his loyal scholar Li Shanchang as Grand Master of Ceremonies, began the event with the offering of sacrifices at the suburban altars of heaven and earth on Zhongshan Mountain, also known as Purple Mountain, announcing before the spirits the proclamation of the new era, Hongwu.
昭告天地皇之，立国大明，建元洪武。
The name would become synonymous with Zhu Yuanzhang, who thus became the Hongwu Emperor. Zhu had initiated the Yi Shi Yi Yuan Zhi system, one era for one generation, ensuring that all subsequent emperors would only have one regnal era name. This system would even carry on in the Qing dynasty. There would be only one exception, found in Hongwu's great-great-grandson, Zhu Qizhen, an emperor who would be captured by the Mongols and replaced, only to reclaim his throne later, but this is a story for another video. In any case, a new dynasty had dawned, one of radiance, which would hold China for nearly 300 years. Its name, Da Ming, Great Ming, meaning brightness. Having officially founded his lineage, important officials of the new dynasty gathered to formally congratulate Zhu Yuanzhang, the Hongwu Emperor. Following this, the Hongwu Emperor proceeded to the ancestral shrine to pay respects to his forefathers, where he delivered patents certifying their imperial nature and bestowing honorific temple names on them. The little information that is known about them today may have been fabricated on this occasion. Finally, Zhu Yuanzhang proceeded to the Fengtian Hall at the heart of the forbidden city of Yingtian, soon to be renamed Nanjing. In the palace, built for great ceremonies, he received formal congratulations of high-ranking military and civil officials. An edict of proclamation was drafted, emphasizing the legitimacy of the Yuan dynasty to replace the Song, and now of the Ming, guided by the Hongwu Emperor, to replace the Yuan. The document was promptly dispatched throughout the empire and beyond its borders. Zhu Yuanzhang's wife, who had stayed close to him through thick and thin since he had joined the Red Turban Rebellion, became the Empress Ma. Their son, Zhu Biao, now 12 years old, was declared Crown Prince. In a quarter of a century, amidst chaotic times, an orphaned peasant boy had claimed the mandate of heaven, ascended the throne of China, and founded the great Ming dynasty. Zhu Yuanzhang had already made his mark on history, but the emperor's ambition would not stop there. he was determined to annex the whole Yuan dynasty, which still claimed to be the legitimate authority over the empire, and reunify the country under his rule. Seemingly benevolent at first, his reign would later take a very dark turn. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.
In 1368, the Ming dynasty rose to power in China, ending nearly 100 years of Mongol dominion. The first ruler of this line, the Hongwu Emperor, enjoyed a long and prosperous reign, but following his death, civil strife enveloped his realm. War erupted between Hongwu's son and his rebellious uncle, Ju Di, who decisively defeated his nephew and deposed him as emperor. Ju Di took on the imperial moniker of Yongle, a title meaning eternal joy. The Yongle Emperor proved to be among the most ambitious monarchs in Chinese history, sending soldiers south to annex Annam, while personally leading armies north to fight the Mongols, who remained a threat to his domain. All the while, he facilitated the building of a new grand capital, the city of Beijing. The emperor wished to see his domain expanded throughout the oceans, to have all nations across the 4 cardinal directions come under his economic influence and acknowledge China's greatness. In this endeavor, he appointed one of his most trusted confidants, the eunuch known as Zheng He. Zheng He was born in 1371 in the province of Yunnan, which sits in the shadow of the Himalayas. His birth name was Ma He, and he was the son of a minor official in the Mongol Empire, whose ancestors were likely of Persian origin. His family was Muslim, and he lived his entire life as a devotee of that faith. At 10 years old, Ma He saw a Ming army march into his home province to seize it from the Mongol remnant. His father was killed in the ensuing fighting, and he was taken captive. As was the custom, Ma He was castrated and given into the services of Ju Di. Despite his maiming, the young eunuch fought bravely in the battles that put his master on the throne, and thus became one of the most trusted confidants of the new emperor, who bestowed upon him his new name, Zheng, which was the name of his favourite warhorse. There was still the matter of building the fleet, into which Yongle poured monumental amounts of resources to see through. In the old capital of Nanjing, a massive dry dock was set up, over a quarter-mile wide. In it, the great treasure ships were built. These were gargantuan 9-mast vessels over 450 feet in length and 200 feet in width, 5 times bigger than the ships of Christopher Columbus. These behemoths were a marvel of engineering, featuring watertight compartments in their hulls, ensuring only one pocket would be flooded should a leak spring, and not the whole ship. They were aptly named, for they carried a priceless cargo of silks, porcelain, gold, silver and other treasures that would be gifted to foreign rulers who paid tribute to the Ming. 62 treasure ships would be completed in the span of only 3 years, supplemented by 190 smaller vessels carrying supplies. The crewmen assembled included cooks, sailmakers, carpenters, physicians, record keepers, diplomats, translators and professional soldiers, including cavalrymen, whose mounts were housed aboard nautical stables. Zheng He's fleet was a floating city. In the summer of 1405, the first voyage began. At Nanjing, the crew performed offerings and prayers to Mazu, the Chinese patron goddess of sailors. Even the Muslim Zheng He was known to spread the worship of this spirit rooted in Buddhist and Taoist tradition. From there, the treasure ships proceeded down the Yangtze River to the port of Liujiagang, where the support ships awaited them. Come December, the winter monsoon winds blew southwest, propelling the fleet first to Quenya, then to Sumatra, through the Strait of Malacca, and out into the Bay of Bengal. Unlike later European explorers, Zheng He was plying lands already known to his people. Even so, he used various means of reliable navigation. Magnetic compasses determined his whereabouts, and slow-burning incense sticks measured distance and time. The fleet navigators had access to detailed sea charts, and were able to read the altitude of key stars while sailing along certain latitudes. The fleet rounded Ceylon, and arrived in Calicut to great fanfare. Situated on India's west coast, the city was a thriving trade port, but its inhabitants had never seen anything like the treasure fleet before. Hundreds of ships, with a total of over 27,000 crewmen aboard, bearing down upon their home. This was more than half the population of contemporary London. Luckily for them, Zheng He had come with good intentions. Silks, porcelains and other precious treasures were gifted to the local Malayalam elites, while the Chinese received precious stones, corals and pepper in return. For the sailors aboard the ships, it was a new and alien experience, for the people, the food and the cultures of southern India were all brand new to them. After about half a year of ritualized bartering and trade in Calicut, the fleet fell in with the westerly monsoon winds and began heading home, laden heavily with foreign luxuries and ambassadors from Calicut, Quilon, Sumatra, Malacca and beyond. On the way back, Zheng He was made aware of a pirate flotilla in the Strait of Malacca, led by the notorious Chinese pirate lord Chen Zuyi, who evidently had designs upon the treasure fleet. Sources on this conflict are thin, but it is recorded that Zheng He led the pirates into an ambush where a battle followed. Highly disciplined Ming soldiers threw explosives and incendiary grenades into the pirate ships, sinking 10 and capturing 7. Zuyi was captured after a several-month-long chase. Zheng He returned to China triumphantly in 1407. The foreign treasures were presented to the Yongle Emperor, the diplomats welcomed to the Ming court, and Chen Zuyi was publicly beheaded in Nanjing. The treasure fleet's next notable exploits came upon their third voyage, which lasted from 1409 to 1411. Like the first two cruises, it sailed down the coast of Southeast Asia and through the Strait of Malacca, trading with the various kingdoms there. This time they encountered the Prince Paramiswara, who had just founded a burgeoning trade city. Paramiswara offered up his realm to Zheng He, who gladly took it under Ming suzerainty on behalf of his emperor. In kowtowing to the Chinese, the Malaccan prince ensured his city would be unmolested by his expansionist neighbours, who dared not invoke the ire of the Ming. Soon, his city became the most prosperous trading port in the strait. Following this exertion of Chinese political clout, the treasure fleet traded with the locals for nutmeg, cloves, pepper and ginger before sailing on. In Ceylon, Zheng He found trouble. The local Buddhist Sinhalese were embroiled by wars both with Hindu Tamils and amongst themselves. The regional power was the kingdom of Kotte, ruled by the usurper king Alekisvara. The Sinhalese suspected the foreign fleet of trying to steal their sacred relic, the Tooth of Buddha. Alekisvara refused to pay Zheng He any tribute and drove the Chinese from his shores, forcing them to move on to Calicut. On the return voyage, Zheng He arrived back in Ceylon with vengeance in mind, and a small war followed. Sources differ wildly on the nature of this conflict, but it is widely agreed that the admiral himself and 2,000 soldiers were lured inland by the Kotte king, where Sinhalese forces felled trees to cut them off from the coast. Alekisvara mustered the majority of his soldiers to launch a surprise assault upon the treasure fleet and plunder its riches, but the eunuch was a quick thinker and stormed the sparsely defended Sinhalese capital city with his 2,000 men. The Sinhalese were now forced to besiege their own capital, but the Ming soldiers held their own. During this fight, Zheng He managed to capture Alekisvara and escape back to his ships. They departed from the island in safety, and the hostage king was taken to Nanjing. Ultimately, the Yongle Emperor released Alekisvara and sent him home, but not before appointing Parakramabahu VI as the new king of Ceylon at the suggestion of the Sinhalese ambassadors. This new ruler paid regular tribute to the Ming, rendering Ceylon back under Chinese influence. The fourth voyage commenced in 1413, with expanded horizons. This time, the fleet was to sail beyond Calicut and into the Persian Gulf. The Chinese soon arrived at the port of Hormuz, where they were greeted warmly by the local authorities. There, the sailors were immersed in the riches of the Persian and Arabic worlds, offering out their wealth in return for precious stones, pearls, ornate Persian carpets, and fine Arabic horses. It was here that Zheng He first came into contact with the cultures of sub-Saharan Africa, for Hormuz was a thriving trading port and brought in entrepreneurs from across the Muslim world. The eunuch met merchants from Mogadishu and Malindi, as well as the lions and leopards they brought from their homeland. These merchants sold their animals to the Chinese, and after further prompting, agreed to come aboard the treasure fleet and go to Nanjing as envoys, paying tribute to Yongle. Meanwhile, one of Zheng He's admirals, Yang Min, had peeled off the main fleet to Bengal, where the local ruler had gifted him an African giraffe. On the return journey through Malacca, Zheng He became embroiled in a dynastic dispute for the throne of Semidera, where a usurper named Sikandar had deposed the king, Zayn al-Abidin. Zheng He sided with al-Abidin. This enraged Sikandar, prompting him to attack the fleet, allegedly with 10,000 men. The Ming soldiers defeated this army and placed al-Abidin back upon the throne, making it a tributary state. Yang Min returned back to Nanjing first, followed by Zheng He with the bulk of the fleet. The foreign treasures and live animals were received triumphantly by the Ming court, but it was the giraffe in particular that caused a widespread stir among the Chinese people. Many believed the gentle, long-necked creature to be a qilin, a mythical spirit that appeared only to mark the arrival of a great sage ruler. Its presence in the Chinese court was a sign that Yongle's reign was blessed by the heavens, and it became synonymous with the emperor's boundless prestige. In 1417, Zheng He departed on his 5th voyage, with the intention to go further than he'd ever gone before. Sailing beyond Hormuz, he docked at the port of Aden in modern-day Yemen. There, the Chinese acquired more material wealth from the Arab world, alongside ostriches and zebras, as well as more lions and giraffes. From Aden, the fleet made its way down to Mogadishu and Malindi, returning home the African merchants they had picked up on their previous voyage. There they encountered towns defined by coral rag houses and lush citrus gardens. Records of the treasure fleet's travels here are thin, but the local Swahilis generally received them well, although one account claims Zheng He ordered a gunpowder cannon fired into the walls of a belligerent chieftain's town. Either way, the eunuch admiral had travelled farther than any East Asian sailor in history. Unfortunately, the golden age of the treasure fleet was slowly coming to an end. In 1424, following the end of Zheng He's 6th voyage, the Yongle emperor died, succumbing to illness while on campaign against the Mongols. With him, the Ming's desire to fund more voyages slowly dissipated. Yongle's son staunchly opposed the fleet, but he died only a year into his reign, succeeded by his son, the Xuande emperor. Xuande opted to honour his grandfather's ambitions by calling upon Zheng He once more. Thus, in 1431, 10 years after the conclusion of his previous voyage, the 60-year-old admiral was sent on one final cruise. On this journey, the great admiral met his end, passing away in Calicut in 1433 and being buried at sea. With both Yongle and Zheng He gone, there was nothing left to stop the Ming court from disbanding the treasure fleet. There is still debate as to why the voyages were terminated. Scholars claim that sects within the imperial court had always been fundamentally opposed to the fleets, seeing it as a flagrant insult to China's Confucian values, which imparted the importance of a land-based agrarian society. Others cite a widespread resentment for the eunuch faction of which Zheng He was a part. The fleet had been a hallmark of their power, and its destruction was a way to diminish their influence. Ultimately, economics was likely the principal reason for the fleet's stoppage. Yongle had bled his treasury dry with his other ventures. His war fronts had cost him dearly, while building Beijing had also incurred huge expenses. After his death, the Ming decided that ocean-going trade was no longer monetarily feasible. Most of the Great Wall was built by the later Ming emperors, using the funds that would have otherwise gone into maintaining treasure ships. In 1529, the Jiajing emperor burned hundreds of logbooks from Zheng He's voyage in an attempt to erase him from history and establish China as an isolationist nation. Despite this, the connections established by the Admiral Eunuch across Southeast Asia endured. There is physical evidence of this, seen in porcelain bowls made in the early 17th century by Chinese artisans. Inscribed with Arabic calligraphy, they were commissioned by the Sultans of Aceh in Sumatra, who still coveted these Chinese luxuries nearly 2 centuries after Zheng He's death. The treasure fleets also had an indirect role in changing the ethnic makeup of the region. Chinese minorities had existed throughout the South China Sea for centuries, but the era following Zheng He's voyages saw an exponential increase in immigration. Today, Chinese communities in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia and India hold Zheng He as an extremely venerated figure. Furthermore, Zheng He is said to have had mosques built all throughout Southeast Asia. The success of his fleets and their abrupt termination brings many to question if China had squandered the opportunity to form a colonial empire before the kingdoms of Europe took to the seas. Yet the existing legacy of the treasure ships is impressive enough without having to wonder what might have been, and the exploits of Zheng He during the reign of the Yongle Emperor will always be a reminder of a time when China ruled the waves.
The Forbidden City, in the heart of Beijing. It's about the size of 140 football fields and has at least 800 buildings. Completed in the year 1420, it was a pleasure palace, an impregnable fortress, and a technological marvel.
with the top craftsmen, top carpenters, and top materials. So it's the best example of the technology at that time.
A seat of immense power and mystery.
Economically important, politically important, and militarily important. The most important site in the whole of Asia for the last 500 years.
That power was embodied in the Forbidden City's awe-inspiring grandeur.
This is the largest palace complex in the world. And not just the largest palace complex that survives, but the largest palace complex built at any time in history.
The scale of what we see here is unparalleled in the world at the time. And everyone was struck by this because they would never, ever see anything like this in their lives. And they knew this. They knew that this was unique in the world.
Built primarily of wood, the complex follows a clearly laid out plan, aligned on a north-south axis. It was home to vast halls, the private quarters of the imperial family, temples reflecting the many forms of worship observed there, including Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucian philosophy. And it was built at an incredible pace. Major construction of the original Forbidden City buildings took just 4 years. In comparison, the great cathedrals of Europe took decades, even centuries, to complete. There are two pressing questions at the heart of the Forbidden City. How was it built on such a massive scale so quickly? And how has it survived the powerful earthquakes that have repeatedly struck the region over the centuries? China's extensive imperial documents go back thousands of years. Recording everything from battles to earthquakes, they enable researchers to build up a detailed picture of China's seismic history.
This is the earthquake fault map of northern China, and Beijing is located here, right by this fault. All the red stars are earthquakes that occurred in the past 3,000 years or so, recorded in the historical books. So since the construction of the Forbidden City, we can see 4 large earthquakes. They really jump around from fault to fault.
In 1976, a massive earthquake shook Beijing. At magnitude 7.8, it was centered in Tangshan City, around 90 miles east of the capital. In just 15 seconds, it killed at least 250,000 people. The highest death toll of any earthquake in the 20th century. But in this earthquake-prone region, the Forbidden City has never been brought down. What is the secret of its resilience? No Ming Dynasty plans for the original great structure have survived. But builders and engineers have gained a wealth of knowledge as they have restored this aging complex. All of the main buildings have a supporting wooden structural frame at their heart, with walls made of brick and great tiled roofs. But why and how was the Forbidden City built? It was the idea of one man, a military commander, emperor, and visionary, known as Yongle.
Without the Yongle Emperor, you simply would not have had a Forbidden City that we see today. Chinese history would have taken a completely different path, and China would not have the civilization that lasted down to the present day.
Ruling from 1402 to 1424, he was the 3rd emperor of the Ming Dynasty. the Ming drew on earlier technologies unique to China.
Most importantly was printing, paper, gunpowder, and also nautical technology. These were all things that were unknown in the West, even lavatory paper.
The vast Ming Empire stretched from what is now Vietnam almost to Mongolia. Both a scholar and a military commander, Emperor Yongle built the Forbidden City as the center of his new capital at Beijing. It was an historic decision, built to shift control into his own northern power base and to be close to the troublesome border plains occupied by the Mongols. But unbeknownst to him, Beijing is in an earthquake zone. Not only are earthquakes here frequent, their causes are not clearly understood. By contrast, a massive 20th century earthquake took place in 1906 in San Francisco, followed by a deadly fire. The city was virtually flattened, and the reason is clear. San Francisco sits beside the San Andreas Fault, which penetrates deep into the Earth between two tectonic plates, the North American and Pacific.
The two plates are moving against each other. In particular, Pacific plates are moving northward relative to North America.
These plates move past each other, but when they become stuck, tension builds up. When it's released, the result is an earthquake.
If you look around the world, 90% of the earthquakes occurred along boundaries between plates.
So North China, which sits in the middle of a plate, should be stable, but it's not.
You have to keep in mind that this area is far away from plate boundaries. So this is a very peculiar place to have earthquakes inside the plate.
In North China, the Earth's crust is unusually thin and weak, giving rise to faults within the plate itself. These are known as intraplate faults.
And the North China Plain is cut into 3 pieces by 3 long faults. So sometimes the energy is released on this fault, sometimes on that one, sometimes on this one.
Over the centuries, the Beijing region has been hit by several quakes of similar size to the San Francisco killer, and scores of smaller ones. Dr. Zhou, the Forbidden City's resident seismologist, believes the Forbidden City was designed with earthquakes in mind.
They had a lot of experience with earthquakes, which shaped the building of the Forbidden City.
In the centuries before the Forbidden City was built, the Chinese had learned to create resilient structures using wood. American woodworker Richard Wyborg
This is incredible.
has long made a study of China's ancient wooden structures.
I saw a photograph of a man sitting on the roof of a pagoda, and in comparison to the size of the timbers, he looked tiny. And just the massive quality of the wood, the intricacy, the number of pieces connected together, a light went on and I said, I've got to find out more about this.
A resident of San Francisco, Richard wants to understand how the buildings of the Forbidden City have withstood earthquakes. Today, he's visiting Tai Miao Temple, the temple of ancestral worship, built by Emperor Yongle in 1420. This huge hall was where sacrifices were made to honor the emperor's ancestors, in the hope of bringing good fortune. Richard climbs up to the ceiling to investigate some of the key structural elements of Ming architecture.
Here we are in a place I never imagined I'd be, 20 feet off the ground in a Ming imperial building.
High up, Richard gets right next to a set of brackets that link the timber frame to the roof.
These are called dogong, and they support a roof and stabilize the building. A bracket set is a complicated puzzle, many different parts that fit together to make a whole. And what we're hoping to discover is A, how they're made, and B, why they were made.
Simple dogong brackets go back 3,000 years. They gradually became more and more complex. By the time the Forbidden City was built, they had become essential structural elements. Every building has a forest of dogongs, linking the columns and beams to the roof. In Beijing's Architecture Museum, Richard Weiborg takes one of these brackets apart.
Now, after taking a deep breath, we'll try and put this back together again.
The only things holding it together are precise carpentry and layers of interlocking pieces.
You can see this isn't, even for somebody who's done it a few times, it's complicated. One piece goes in the front here. There you have it, a bracket set. So you can see it's a little bit flexible. It's very strong. Pressing down, it can take a tremendous amount of weight. It ties together with other parts of the building and is a beautiful, creative feature of Chinese architecture.
A key function of the dogong brackets is to distribute the heavy weight of the tiled roof. They do that by channeling the load evenly onto horizontal beams and down through the narrow columns supporting the roof.
The dogong has the role of connecting the columns to the purlin and the rafter that forms the roof. The dogong is like an element that funnels in all the loads and redistributes it on the top of the column in a very uniform way.
But what role do the dogong play in protecting the buildings of the Forbidden City from the region's powerful earthquakes? A unique scale model of a classic Forbidden City structure, 1/5 the original size, will reveal the answer when tested under simulated earthquake conditions. The model has 4 key structural elements: vertical columns and horizontal beams that make a timber frame.
So we're seeing a column and a horizontal beam go together. Well done.
This frame holds the dogong that will support the large tiled roof.
This is the base block of a bracket set.
And like the brackets in the Forbidden City itself, this set is assembled without any fasteners. There are no nails, screws, or glue.
It's sort of like a wooden puzzle. It's so fabulously complex. This is a wonderful combination of form and function. You know, very artistic, very imaginative, and very strong. It's a very sophisticated piece of woodworking, and we're going to see what will happen to it when we subject it to the extreme forces of the earthquake test.
This model is patterned on a building in the private area of the Forbidden City, the Palace of Longevity and Health. It's a typical Forbidden City structure.
What you immediately notice is this huge golden roof that curves outwards away from the building in a way that you just don't see in European architecture. Looking up here, what we have is these elegantly colored crossbeams decorated with imperial dragons and phoenixes. And they're there to support these huge red columns that bear the structural load of that massive roof. But if you look up here, in between the crossbeams and the roof, underneath that mesh, there's these flower-shaped dogong.
Together, these 4 structural components, columns, beams, dogongs, and roof somehow protect these buildings from earthquakes. But how do they work together? To find the answer, the scale model is reassembled in a seismic lab, ready for a series of shake table tests that will subject it to dozens of simulated earthquakes. These will push the columns, beams, brackets, and roof to their limits.
Wow, the roof is so big. It's amazing.
Yes, it is. This is a very authentic, traditional timber frame building.
The model has traditional Ming-style brick walls, 2 layers of brickwork with rubble between.
Yes, we are ready to start.
Okay, let's go.
Altogether, it weighs over 3 tons and could endanger anyone standing nearby. So a safe zone is created around the shake table in all directions.
Test 1, start!
As the test begins, the shake table moves horizontally, replicating the energy and impact of an earthquake. Gradually, the acceleration increases. Finally, 3 tons of Ming-style architecture starts to move. The engineers have never tested a model like this before. No one knows how long it will last. An earthquake's size is defined by its magnitude, the amount of energy released. Magnitude 4 is generally considered a weak earthquake that most modern structures can survive. But what about the model, based on an ancient design? The magnitude rises gradually. The model survives a 4, and then a 4.5.
The sound was like the creaking of a ship, wood compressing, twisting, groaning, but no obvious damage.
Next is magnitude 5, a massive increase with over 30 times the energy of a 4. The movement piles pressure onto all the structural components. As the magnitude progresses beyond 5, the sideways movement proves too much for one of the brick walls.
Maybe we'll take one step back.
Yes, we are worried. It's unpredictable.
While the timber frame flexes, the walls are just too brittle. The second wall topples.
In traditional Chinese building, the walls have only the role of defining and dividing the space. They don't really have a structural role because they are not supporting the roof. Their failure does not threaten the overall stability of the structure.
That was pretty exciting.
We can see the walls have completely collapsed, but the traditional timber frame is still standing strong.
As the test proceeds to magnitude 7, the model is shaking, but it remains intact. What role do the dogong brackets play in this?
The timber frames moved during the earthquake because of the dugong and because of this very particular connection.
Through their ingenious design, the dogong disperse the energy of the tremors.
So as the vibration comes through the columns and into the dugong, each of the dugong parts move relative to each other. So through friction, this movement will dissipate the energy, reducing the overall effects of the earthquake on the integrity of the structure.
In addition to structural elements, to build the Forbidden City, Ming architects and engineers had to come up with ideas and innovations on an enormous scale. Before the main building phase could begin, a decade of preparation was needed to set up a vast and complex system of logistics. to conscript a huge labor force and create a massive supply chain across China. Because Beijing lacks natural resources, virtually everything had to be brought here, including much of the wood. The Forbidden City's palaces, temples, and the Emperor Yongle's great halls are dominated by tall wooden columns. In the ancestral hall at Tai Miao Temple, 42-foot tall columns sparkle as if speckled with gold.
Look at this magnificent column, so round and so smooth. Imagine how big the tree was that this came from.
In fact, we have 68 columns in total for this hall, and they're supporting the structure. And they look beautiful as well.
This is a single log of a Nanmu tree. Today, one of the rarest of Chinese woods. It's straight, dense, and resistant to rot. Just one of these great logs weighed over 40 tons. But Nanmu trees grow more than 1,000 miles from Beijing, in Sichuan, to the southwest, hidden deep in mountainous forests. Felling the trees and then dragging the heavy logs to the Yangtze River for transportation was treacherous.
According to a local saying, 1,000 people go into the mountains and only 500 come out. The mortality rate was terrible.
Despite the cost and risks, the emperor demanded nearly 100,000 logs to be imported from the southwest. These alone could take 4 years to reach Beijing. The Forbidden City also needed golden-colored floor tiles made with special clay in Jiangsu province 600 miles away. Perfectly polished, each tile took more than a year to make. 80 million bricks were produced in kilns on an industrial scale outside Beijing. And piles of gold leaf, hammered by hand to 1/500th the thickness of a human hair, produced in specialized workshops in distant Nanjing. But how did all these supplies reach Beijing at the right time? To accomplish this, the emperor's engineers extended China's ancient Grand Canal. A simpler version was constructed over 1,000 years earlier, but Yongle revitalized and expanded it into a water superhighway, able to carry everything needed to Beijing.
The Grand Canal is both longer and older than the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. They really solved a very large problem of canal engineering at the time.
The Grand Canal ran over 1,000 miles from commercial Hangzhou, across the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, before reaching Beijing.
This is the main channel of the Grand Canal. To the south is Hangzhou, to the north is Beijing.
Today, this section is mostly dry, but it's still possible to see the remains of the Ming's water engineering. This is what it would have looked like 600 years ago. It would have been full of barges carrying workers, soldiers, materials, and grain supplies north to feed the huge Beijing building site. But before this could happen, the Ming faced an enormous engineering challenge. Standing in the way of the canal was a series of hills. The high point of the canal was at Nanwang, 300 miles south of Beijing.
This point here is approximately the watershed between the north and south section of the Grand Canal. So if we were to drop water here, water on this side of the line would flow north, water on this side of the line would flow south.
To get the canal traffic over the high ground at Nanwang, meant that millions of gallons of water had to be diverted from nearby rivers.
Here we are at the center of the Nanwang Water Diversion Project as part of the Grand Canal system.
This Ming Dynasty map shows how rivers were dammed to feed water into huge locks at Nanwang. These large enclosures could be flooded and drained to raise and lower barges, allowing them to get over the high ground. To fill the locks and raise the barges, water had to be diverted from the Wen River and stored in 3 huge man-made lakes. Barges traveling up the canal to Nanwang entered a series of locks over 3 miles long. The river water poured in to raise the barges so they could proceed, step by step, over the high ground toward Beijing.
As a modern-day engineer, I think the main reason why this is so impressive is partly because of the size, but also because of the complexity, trying to manage the water over such a large area. That's a huge achievement, even in modern-day engineering terms. And for just this section of the canal, there was 300,000 laborers conscripted, working for a period of 200 days constantly. And they created this with only the most rudimentary hand tools.
But how could the Ming afford this? The cost was borne by the emperor's subjects in money, materials, and lives.
Tens of thousands of people starved to death. He worked convicts, he worked the military, he worked ordinary peasants. He squeezed as much as he could out of the taxes in order to build their capital.
The result was an engineering masterpiece. Much of the Grand Canal is still in use today. This massive infrastructure project changed China forever. Just as building the Forbidden City altered the landscape of Beijing itself.
This hill gives us an amazing aerial view of the Forbidden City. What's more incredible is that prior to the construction, this hill didn't even exist. It was actually built using the earth excavated from the moat.
All this was produced through the meticulous planning Emperor Yongle demanded. He insisted on controlling each step of the vast project himself. But there were some forces neither he nor his successors could control. Back at the seismic lab, Dr. Zhou and Richard Wyborg are ready to continue the shake table tests on the scale model of a Forbidden City building.
They're still there too.
Having reached magnitude 7 with only the brick walls falling, they now want to see if the model can withstand the force of an even greater earthquake, magnitude 7.8. This matches the size of the 1976 Tangshan City earthquake that killed 250,000 people east of Beijing.
It's a massive human disaster, and many, the whole families, not a single person survived this event.
In just 15 seconds, 85% of the structures in the city were destroyed.
The Tangshan area has this traditional stone type of buildings. So basically all the walls, all the houses, they were all constructed by very heavy rocks, good for insulating heat and cold, but they're not very good at resisting earthquakes.
If the heavy stone buildings of Tangshan failed to resist a magnitude 7.8 earthquake, how will the wooden model perform under a similar assault?
Get ready to jump. Whoa! It scared me, I'll tell you.
Will the columns and beams, the dogong brackets, and the heavy tile roof stand up to such powerful shaking? Amazingly, even after a period of 30 seconds, longer than many real-life earthquakes, they do.
What's it gonna take to knock this thing down?
When Dr. Joe and Richard examine the model, they find one more secret to its resilience: the columns.
This red line shows the column's position before the earthquake. We can see that after the earthquake, the column has moved over here.
The model replicates the way the columns stand in the Forbidden City itself, resting freely on stone foundation plinths. If they were pounded deep into the stone, they would break if overwhelmed by the shaking of an earthquake. Instead, by being left free to move, they can ride out the tremor. The model shows how the columns move, dispersing energy and helping the whole building withstand the shaking.
What we see here is the effect of the shaking on the columns. We can see that all the columns rotate slightly. This helps to dissipate energy and to isolate the movements to the roof. And in that way, the structure is still surviving.
But what about the large, heavy roof? Its curved shape is a tradition that dates back 2,000 years. To build the roof, timber boards are laid onto the rafters. On the outside, layers of red clay are used to waterproof it before glazed tiles are pushed into the clay and overlapped. The colorful roof tiles and mythical beasts that adorn them are still produced in kilns outside Beijing using traditional methods. The area's unusual clay produces long-lasting tiles, but they are heavy. The roof of a big hall in the Forbidden City is estimated to weigh 2,000 tons. All that weight resting on the dogong brackets connecting it to the columns below. Exactly the same tiles and construction technique have been used on the 1/5 scale test model.
Look at the roof moving.
It swings back into place, helping it to recover.
Because of the interlocking construction, the dogong, roof, and frame are connected but can move independently, isolated from each other.
The timber frame is moving at higher speeds, while the roof is moving at a much lower speed.
Slow motion reveals how the movement of the roof lags behind the timber frame. And while the bottom of the structure shifts in one direction, the roof moves the opposite way, countering the effect of the shaking.
There is almost like a recentering action here, because as the timber frame tends to move out in one direction and the roof is still moving in the opposite direction, it pulls it back towards resting position.
The roof acts as a counterweight, balancing the structure and saving the building from collapse. But state-of-the-art engineering, carpentry, and logistics alone did not satisfy the ambitions of the Ming Emperor Yongle. He also demanded artistry. The centerpiece of the Hall of Preserving Harmony is a magnificent grand staircase. It's the largest stone sculpture in the Forbidden City, showing dragons playing in the clouds. Hand-carved from a single vast block of marble, more than 50 feet long, it weighs over 300 tons, more than 2 jet airliners. This marble came from quarries 40 miles from Beijing. But getting the raw stone from the quarry to the Forbidden City was a major challenge.
After the stones were quarried, they were too large for human labor to move. So, what did they do?
Beijing's climate is harsh, and in the winter, the area freezes over. Ming records describe an ice road shaped by engineers to cross any obstacle. But how did the Ming move the massive marble blocks along the ice roads? Rob Dwyer-Joyce is an engineer who researches friction. He has designed an experiment to answer this question.
What we have is a wooden sled, and we've loaded it with stone weighing about a ton, 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds. And we're going to do an experiment to try to pull this along by hand on the ice. This is going to be quite difficult because it's... No, we can't get shifted.
As they struggle, a whole ice hockey team comes to the rescue. But even these strong athletes have a hard time getting it moving.
Whoa!
So how much force does it take to get a 1-ton sled moving across the ice?
So now we put a load cell in front of the sled, and we're going to measure the force on this load cell as the guys start pulling. And now let's have some more skaters. And again.
What we can see here is a force versus time graph. As we added a player, you can see it increases in the steps, and then it gets to a certain force and then drops. And this drops because the sledge starts to slide. And when we do that, the force required to pull the sledge along plateaus.
It takes a team of players to get the sled moving, but only one to keep it moving. So the challenge is to get it started.
We know from historical sources that the Chinese had water supplies along the route that they were moving the stones, and it's not quite clear what they used that water for.
Ancient documents describe wells dug at 550-yard intervals along the ice road. Rob has a theory that the wells provided water to help get the huge marble blocks moving along the road.
I'm going to put some water down there, see how many we need when we've slightly wetted the ice. Go on, pull, guys.
The water acts as a lubricant between the ice and the sled, making it easier to get it to start. And once it's moving, continuing pressure melts the ice, keeping the sled going.
The Chinese moved these large lumps of stone on a much bigger scale than what we've done today. I rather admire them for having done that several hundred years ago to realize that once the sled was moving, it generated friction, but they probably needed water to form that film between the sled and the ice to get started in the first place.
This level of engineering skill made it possible for artists to carve the magnificent marble staircase at the Hall of Preserving Harmony. But similar artistry is found throughout the Forbidden City. This is epitomized by the use of a vast array of colors: turquoise, blue, and green, both inside and outside the buildings. New discoveries about the Forbidden City's paint are now coming to light. The Hall of Mental Cultivation was built in a quiet, private area of the Forbidden City, which is being restored. Dr. Lei and his team are working to identify the precise pigments used in the paints.
The paint is falling off. So first of all, we need to find out what type of paint it is.
The scanner emits X-rays, which are reflected back in a unique frequency for each element in the pigment. Back in his lab, Dr. Lei uses both the scan data and a microscopic examination of paint fragments to identify the precise pigments used.
It looks like a man-made pigment. It's called smalt.
Blue smalt is not a naturally occurring pigment, and it wasn't made in China. It's a synthetic color, made by adding cobalt oxide to molten glass. It was made in Europe after China's Ming period, so these layers of paint were likely applied during a later restoration and may be evidence of international trade and exchange. It also suggests that no expense was spared to decorate the Forbidden City with the world's finest materials. Today, the Forbidden City is a World Heritage Site that attracts 16 million visitors a year. But 600 years ago, these halls and courtyards were reserved for the elite. The name itself, the Forbidden City, indicates that ordinary people were not welcome here. It took over 1 million laborers to build the expansive complex. In December 1420, it was complete. Diplomats and dignitaries arrived from across Asia for its grand opening ceremony. Visiting ambassadors describe how elephants flanked the main gate. 100,000 people from the Ming Empire and beyond filled the Great Square.
They've never seen this level of craftsmanship. They've never seen the scale of Beijing or the Forbidden City. They're overwhelmed by just the physical space. And of course, that is the intention of building the Forbidden City. It's this statement of political power, the power of the dynasty, but also the power of the emperor, the man who sits on the throne. And for most people at the time, they were persuaded, yeah, that's right. This is the most powerful man in the world.
The emperor's day typically began at the Palace of Heavenly Purity.
This courtyard and the palace behind me is the most sacred location in the entire Forbidden City.
This was Yonglu's residence.
And every morning he would rise at about 4 o'clock and he would come down this central pathway. Only he could pass along the central line for the dawn audience.
At daybreak, hundreds of officials would gather in silence to kowtow before His Majesty. Filling the courtyard in front of the city's grandest structure, the Hall of Supreme Harmony.
In the very center is the throne. And above, you have the symbol of the heavens. And the throne is directly underneath the heaven. Why? Because the emperor is the son of heaven.
China's traditional belief system demanded that the emperor constantly prove he had the mandate of heaven. And he had to demonstrate as well that he was worthy to rule by maintaining a careful balance between the earthly and cosmic orders.
This is the mimic octopus, a master of disguise. In its natural state, the mimic octopus is a light beige color, and like most octopi, can change its skin pigment to blend in with its surroundings. But the mimic octopus takes things to another level altogether. Found in Indonesia and in the Great Barrier Reef, it's an octopus that is so intelligent that when it feels threatened, it can fool possible predators into thinking that it is in fact another, more deadly species. It does this by changing its color, shape, and perhaps most interestingly, the way it moves and behaves. It's reputed to be able to impersonate 15 other kinds of sea creature, the most notable being the poisonous flatfish, deadly sea snakes, and the highly venomous lionfish. It's thought that even though these impersonations aren't flawless, they can give the crafty octopus enough time to escape before the predator realizes it's been duped. The mimic octopus was discovered relatively recently in 1998, possibly because up until then, it had done such a good job of disguising itself.
But that harmony could be disrupted by nature. Fire, caused by accidents or lightning strikes, was a constant threat to these mainly wooden structures. The Hall of Supreme Harmony itself burned down many times. But another great fear was earthquakes. On the morning of September 2nd, 1679, Beijing was struck by disaster. The city was hit by one of the biggest earthquakes in its entire history. Imperial records suggest it killed around 15,000 people. China's detailed historic records hold valuable clues, which Professor An Yin uses to work out the magnitude and nature of ancient earthquakes, including the one in 1679.
There is some kind of tombstone, which is supposed to face to one direction, usually face to south, but that tombstone rotates. So that's very important to geologists because we can use those historical records to determine the way the earthquake was generated, whether it's moving up and down or sideways. So for this one, it has to be moved by the sideways.
Imperial records suggest the 1679 quake was a magnitude 8. It destroyed thousands of stone structures, including the original white pagoda or stupa, for Buddhists, a place of meditation.
So here we see the white stupa, constructed originally in 1651 and then destroyed in a massive earthquake, but then almost immediately rebuilt.
The restored stupa still towers over the Imperial Park and Beijing. But while the original stupa collapsed in 1679, records indicate that the Forbidden City just 500 yards away suffered only minor damage, mainly to the brick walls.
Most of the descriptions focus on the city walls and the city gates. It seems like the major palaces, architectures are not damaged.
But can the model, in its final seismic test, withstand a force even greater than the 1679 earthquake? The scientists will now expose the model to magnitude 8.2, the power of the largest earthquake ever to hit the Beijing region, and stronger than the 1906 earthquake that destroyed San Francisco.
Magnitude 8.2, begin. Now the quake is getting stronger. The frame is shaking badly.
Pretty darn strong.
The test moves to magnitude 8.6, the strongest earthquake to hit this part of Asia. It shook Tibet in 1950, destroying over 70 villages and causing massive landslides. As the magnitude increases and the shake table delivers more energy, the structure sways dramatically, but it remains standing.
This is incredible.
After a series of escalating shocks, the test moves beyond 9.5, the largest quake in recorded history. This devastated Chile in 1960, causing a tsunami as far away as Hawaii.
Magnitude 10.1, begin.
In this final phase, the shake table peaks at magnitude 10.1. as high as the technology can go. The test must come to an end.
Test finished.
We wanted to break this building and it wouldn't break. So wonderful test. What was most surprising to me was how much the building could move, how flexible it was. This is a fabulous proof of the genius of Chinese traditional architecture.
To build the Forbidden City 600 years ago, the Ming Chinese had to meet a vast array of challenges. Mastering logistics on land, water, and ice. Applying engineering ingenuity and carpentry skill. And demonstrating artistry of color and design. It cost thousands of lives and the toil of a nation. But they built a city unique in all the world. At least 800 buildings, mainly all out of wood. It was the Ming Dynasty's most enduring creation, the beating heart of their empire, the Forbidden City.
There's two over there, and there's one beneath us. And Fred here, who's making quite a dream. What is your problem?
混战。
就下点太低了。
Torii are also a sacred gateway in Shintoism, the indigenous religious practice of Japan. Even with an over 2,000-year history, Shinto has never been easy to define. The word Shinto wasn't even used much until the 17th century. But Shinto has its own shrines, priests, gods and rituals, everything you'd expect from a religion. But today, while over 80% of Japanese people participate in Shinto practices, only 3 to 4% identify themselves as believers in Shinto. And many Japanese people practice Shinto alongside Buddhism without any sense of contradiction. So, what is Shinto? In the beginning, there was nothing but formless chaos. Over eons, the lighter particles of this chaos rose and became heaven, and the heavier ones fell and formed the earth, which was then a muddy ocean. Between these realms, 3 heavenly beings, or kami, formed. They were followed by 7 more generations of kami. The 7th generation of these kami were a man and woman pair known as Izanagi and Izanami, who descended down to give form to the earth. Izanagi and Izanami took a heavenly spear and stirred up the ocean below, which created an island, the first land. Izanagi and Izanami decided to live on this island and very soon felt the need to have children. So they got down to making babies the good old fashioned way, by erecting a large ceremonial pillar
and performing a marriage ritual by walking around the pillar in opposite directions, and when they met on the other side, Izanami greeted Izanagi first, which resulted in the birth of a boneless and limbless child, who they then very quickly put on a boat and pushed off into the sea. But don't worry, he turns out mostly fine. He grows some bones, he becomes the kami of good luck and fisherman, and even has his own brand of beer now. They decided to give the ritual another go, with Izanagi speaking first, and from this union the islands of Japan were born, along with more kami such as the kami of wind, the kami of mountains, and the kami of grass. Finally, Izanami gave birth to the god of fire and died, because, well, she had just given birth to a baby made of fire. Izanagi, in his grief, killed the baby, cutting it up into pieces, which then became the volcanoes of Japan, and some other kami like the dragon Watatsumi and the storm god and first sumo wrestler Takemekiruchi. Also at this point there was some human waste kind of just lying around, and from that some more kami were born, like the adorable clay kami couple Haniyasu Hiko and Haniyasu Hime. And obviously sad and lonely Izanagi wanted to see Izanami again, and so he descended to Yomi, the gloomy, polluted underworld. He found Izanami down there, and when he shone a light on her, he saw that his wife was a decaying, rotten corpse. Izanagi bolted, which enraged Izanami, who sent an army of demons after him. But as he escaped the underworld, he sealed the door with a giant boulder, protecting the living world from the world of death. The obviously furious Izanami cursed him and promised to kill 1,000 people a day in revenge. Izanagi promised to make sure that 1,500 people were born every day. Izanagi, covered in the pollution from the underworld, wanted to purify himself, so he found a river to perform misoyi, or purification. As he washed, kami were born from the clothes he took off, and from each part of his body that he washed. Finally, he washed his face. When he did this, he created the most important kami, called the 3 precious children. From washing his left eye came Amaterasu Omikami, kami of the sun. From washing his right eye came Tsuyomi no Mikoto, kami of the moon. And from washing his nose came Sano no Mikoto, kami of storms. This is a simplified version of the Japanese creation story as told in the oldest surviving texts of Japanese history and myth, the Kojiki and the Nihonsuki, written in the 8th century. This story introduces us to some of the most important aspects of Shinto, such as kami and purification. We don't know much about Shinto's origins because Shinto has no founders like the Buddha, no prophets like Muhammad, or holy books like the Bible to tell us how it started. But archaeological evidence suggests that practices which could be called Shinto, like the worship of nature spirits in sacred spaces, first appear in Japan in the Yayoi period around 300 BCE to 300 CE. The word Shinto comes from these 2 Chinese characters. Shin, which means god or spirit, the native Japanese word for which is kami, and this character, Do, which means way. This Do or way is the same as the one in Taoism and tells us a lot about Shinto. It's a way of life, a practice, more concerned with rituals and community than with belief, faith, or moral codes. Literally, Shinto is the way of the gods, or in Japanese, the way of the kami. But what exactly is a kami? Kami. To put it simply, Shinto is the worship of kami. The typical translation of kami into English is god or deity, but that's not a great translation. Kami can be spirits of the landscape, forces of nature, and the spirits of dead ancestors. Anything in this world that fills you with a sense of wonder or awe can be a kami. It isn't difficult to see how the ancient Japanese, living in a wondrous world of massive live volcanoes, surging rivers, powerful waterfalls, and vast forests, felt that they lived in a world that was fully alive and aware and inhabited by kami. In Shinto, the physical world itself is sacred, worthy of respect, and you can have a relationship with it. So kami can be godlike, such as the sun goddess Amaterasu, but the concept also extends to other natural phenomena like mountains, rains, foxes, and earthquakes. Smallpox has a kami, and so does fertility, and growth, and rice, and even hair has its own humble kami. In Shinto, there is no one all-powerful god, and instead the universe is watched over by the harmonious cooperation of the kami who live in this world alongside humans, and generally want them to be happy and prosperous. It's a cycle of reciprocity. Humans respect the kami, and the kami take care of the humans. Kamis are expressions of musubi, which is the creative energy of the universe, and also a kind of spam-based sushi. But the spiritual, non-spam based musubi literally means to unite. It ties everyone and everything in the universe together, and so everything is interconnected. The landscape, nature, the kami, humans, all of them are considered to be always growing in the process of creation. Kami are not all powerful or all knowing, and are invisible and immaterial, but they can live inside certain objects in shrines. Kami can also have personalities. They can be beneficial or malevolent, and you can interact with them. This communication comes in the form of prayer and offering sacrifices such as food. The Japanese worship of kami is a way to maintain a sacred relationship with their surroundings. While some kami like Inari, the kami of rice, are worshipped across Japan, many kami are deeply local, like the kami of a specific village, family, or waterfall, like the kami of Nachi Falls. A single individual tree might even have a kami. For example, when the Kayashima railway station needed to expand, locals protested against the chopping down of this tree because it housed a kami, and so the station had to be built around it. Failing to perform the correct rituals or disrespecting kami can lead to punishment called shinbatsu, usually in the form of illness. Most kami are good, but some kami, like the Magatsuhi no Kami, the kami of disaster, are essentially destructive and cause misfortune. But luckily, Naobi no Kami, the kami of undisaster, is tasked with cleaning up after Magatsuhi no Kami's destruction. There are also the yokai, weird and wonderful, mischievous monsters that pop up in Japanese mythology. These can range from terrifying, soul-devouring demons down to the tofu kozu, a baby with a massive head that follows you around, constantly offering you tofu. There are said to be 8 million kami, which is just the Japanese way of saying an uncountable amount. Certain important humans can be considered kami both before and after death, like Tenjin, a 10th century scholar who was so smart that he became the kami of academics after dying, and who worried students will pray to for luck in passing exams. Or like the Emperor of Japan, who from the Meiji period was considered a living kami until renouncing his divinity after Japan's surrender in the Second World War.
man? Lost BRU sensor. Lost BRU? Yeah. Alright. Might even have to go manual for this. It's probably still good. Still got the gyros. What it was the essentially the heading still coming around. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we lost the.
They tear matter from its surface and drag it into orbit. This superheated matter spins around the mouth of the black hole, and great jets of radiation fire from the core. Although these jets can be seen across the cosmos, the core itself remains a mystery.
This has to be the right way.
Before we continue, let's stop a moment and take a look at some of the key features of this demo. Much of what you see was built with Quixel Megascan assets, but instead of using the game versions, we used the cinematic versions, which would typically only be used in film. There are around 1 million triangles each, and thanks to virtual texturing, they all use 8K textures as well. Nanite can render an insane number of triangles very quickly. There are over 1 billion triangles of source geometry in each frame that Nanite crunches down losslessly to around 20 million drawn triangles. What does that many triangles look like? This isn't noise. These are the triangles, each a different color. Most are so small that they look like noise. Nanite achieves detail down to the pixel, which means triangles are often the size of pixels. This amount of geometric detail requires shadows to be pixel accurate as well, and Nanite can do that too. Speaking of lighting, all of the lighting in this demo is completely dynamic, with the power of Lumen that even includes multi-bounce global illumination. No light maps, no baking here. Without GI, all of that beautiful lighting is gone. With Lumen enabled, we can move the light and the bounce changes instantly. Okay, let's keep going. We've made some great additions to our audio system as well. Convolution reverb allows us to measure reverberation characteristics of real spaces, like actual caves that we sampled, and reproduce them in virtual spaces. Sound field rendering allows us to record and play back spatialized audio. All of this adds up to a more immersive experience. This swarm of bats was created with our Niagara effects system. Particles in Niagara can now talk to one another and understand their environment like never before. We've also added a ton of new functionality to run fluid simulations like you see in the water below. The demo runs on our chaos physics system. Here we are using it to accurately simulate the rigid bodies of the falling rocks and the cloth of her scarf. Now that the environment is so complex, we've needed to greatly improve our animation systems to adapt. We've added predictive foot placement and motion warping, which dynamically modifies IK and body position to look more natural. For the character to more realistically interact with the environment, we've added the ability to trigger seamless contextual animation events, like her hand on the door.
Looks promising.
Dynamic GI is amazing, not just for speeding up iteration, but also for its impact on gameplay.
Nice.
Any light source can move while
It
still
might
having
be.
beautiful bounce lighting. Dynamic illumination means specular as well, which you can see on all the metal surfaces. You can even see the Niagara-powered bugs reacting to the light. Lumen not only reacts to moving light sources, but also changes in geometry. Remember we mentioned high poly assets? This statue was imported directly from ZBrush and is more than 33 million triangles. No baking of normal maps, no authored LODs. And we can do more than a single statue. There are nearly 500 of that exact statue at the same detail level placed in this room for a total of over 16 billion triangles from statues alone. Over this entire demo, there are hundreds of billions of triangles. So with nanite, you have limitless geometry, and with lumen, you have fully dynamic lighting and global illumination, all running on a PlayStation 5.
There's not much time left.
And this doesn't need to be constrained to small rooms. It can stretch all the way to the horizon.
The portal, it's open. Don't fail me now. Time to see what's next.
Physicist Max Tegmark from MIT thinks he knows why. He sees similarities between our world and that of a computer game.
If I were a character in a computer game that was so advanced that I were actually conscious and I started exploring my video game world, it would actually feel to me like it was made of real solid objects, made of physical stuff. Yet if I started studying, as the curious physicist that I am, the properties of this stuff, the equations by which things move and the equations that give the stuff its properties, I would discover eventually that all these properties were mathematical. The mathematical properties that the programmer had actually put into the software that describes everything.
The laws of physics in a game, like how an object floats, bounces, or crashes, are only mathematical rules created by a programmer. Ultimately, the entire universe of a computer game is just numbers and equations.
That's exactly what I perceive in this reality too as a physicist, that the closer I look at things that seem non-mathematical, like my arm here in my hand, the more mathematical it turns out to be. Could it be that our world also then is really just as mathematical as the computer game reality?
To Max, the software world of a game isn't that different from the physical world we live in. He thinks that mathematics works so well to describe reality because ultimately, mathematics is all that it is. There's nothing else.
Many of my physics colleagues will say that mathematics describes our physical reality, at least in some approximate sense. I go further and argue that it actually is our physical reality, because I'm arguing that our physical world doesn't just have some mathematical properties, but it has only mathematical properties.
Here you have mathematical theories which make very definitive predictions about the possible existence of some fundamental particles of nature. And believe it or not, they make these huge experiments and they actually discover the particles that have been predicted mathematically. I mean, this is just amazing to me.
Why does this work? How can mathematics be so powerful? Is mathematics, a truth of nature, or does it have something to do with the way we as humans perceive nature? To me, this is just a fascinating puzzle. I don't know the answer.
It was so dark because of the smoke and dust being sucked up in the mushroom cloud. And the ghostly procession. I say ghostly because they just didn't look like human beings. Their hair was just all standing up toward the sky. They were burned and blackened and swollen. Parts of the bodies were missing. And they were covered with blood, and clothes were tattered. And the flesh and skin hanging from their bones.
Yoshiaka stumbles to the door of the communications bunker. Climbing on top of the bunker, she is stunned to discover her city in ruins.
There was a soldier on the ground suffering from burns. I thought, there's someone on the ground, and ran towards him. He noticed me and said, half groaning, "We've been hit by a new type of bomb." A new type of bomb.
A local photographer finds a huddle of burned people on the morning of August 6th, trying to soothe their wounds with cooking oil. After seeing his classmates consumed by fire, 7-year-old Takashi Tanamori is pulled from the ruins of his burning school by a soldier and carried into the city.
There was a man, I think he was a man, unrecognizably burned, scarred, and marred. You can't tell it, but I knew that was a man. He said to soldiers who's clutching me in his arm, he said, "Water, water, please, water." And the soldier just...
"11-year-old Tetsushi Yonezawa and his mother are only 750 yards from ground zero, shielded in a crowded tram. All the other passengers are killed by the blast.
My mother and I were surrounded by people, so we were uninjured. I knocked my head and got shards of glass in my hair, but at that time I didn't notice them. My mother grabbed my hand and said, "Are you all right, Tetsushi?" When I replied that I was okay, she said that we should get off the tram.
Yoshiaka returns to her post in the communications bunker, desperate to send out the news of what has happened in Hiroshima. She finds one working phone and reaches an officer in regional headquarters.
I said, "Yes, the whole of Hiroshima has been annihilated." The person at the other end said, "I don't understand what you are saying. What do you mean, annihilated?" As I thought about how I could possibly make him understand, I remembered what the soldier on the embankment said. "We've been hit by a new type of bomb." So I said to him, "We've been hit by a new type of bomb."
But today, while over 80% of Japanese people participate in Shinto practices, only 3 to 4% identify themselves as believers in Shinto. And many Japanese people practice Shinto alongside Buddhism without any sense of contradiction.